Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started in about a minute. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'll go ahead and get us started here. Welcome to the next member hour in our producer series. This edition titled Producing Eggs in the United States. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I'm the host today. ASABE member hours were started as an opportunity for our members to grow, connect, and learn. In a few minutes, we'll get started, but just a few quick ground rules. Please do keep your audio on mute throughout the presentation. If you have questions, you can either type them into the chat throughout the presentation, or you can unmute yourself towards the end and ask your question verbally. This meeting will be recorded and it will be available for later viewing on the ASABE website. Today, we're hearing from Chad Gregory. Chad is the president and CEO of United Egg Producers. UEP is a Capper-Volstead cooperative of U.S. farmers working collaboratively to address legislative, regulatory, and advocacy issues impacting egg production through active farmer member leadership, a unified voice, and partnership across the agriculture community. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Is that correct? Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you again, Sarah, for letting me just share a little bit today about the U.S. egg industry. And I want to also thank Dr. Hongwei Shin at the University of Tennessee for, I think, recommending me to share with you all a little bit of information here. So, I heard from Sarah and Hongwei that a month or two ago, you did one of these on bourbon. And I'm a bit jealous because I think I would have liked to have participated on that one as a spectator and learned more about bourbon. Hopefully this one is as interesting and entertaining as that one was. You're probably eating more eggs than you are drinking bourbon. So this one probably comes into your life a little more often than that. But I'm guessing a lot of you don't know a lot about the egg industry, and I find myself as just a human, as a person, find myself taking so many things that we consume and eat and buy and use on a daily basis. I take it all for granted, and I really don't know, where it comes from, how it's made, where it starts, how it gets to my store, how it gets to my house, and I don't realize and understand, the complexities in what it costs. The farmer to produce that stuff and ultimately get it to the consumer. I just take things for granted, and I'm assuming a lot of you are the same way. I'm also fascinated by when I go into a plant, whatever the plant may be, or whenever I learn more about how something is made and how something is delivered from, a raw product out to the consumer. I'm just fascinated by how that technology, that innovation works. And so I applaud you all for having these member calls as information sharing and just educational. It's really a great service that you have and you provide. So good for you all. I basically want to just cover two basic topics today in my time. I want to give you a general understanding of United Egg Producers, who I work for. And then I want to give you, with that general understanding, not only United Egg Producers, but the U.S. egg industry. And then the second thing I want to cover is just some of our topics, our top challenges, at least two of our top current challenges right now. And that is high-path avian influenza and the transition to cage-free. So I'll cover those last two things, the high-path AI and the transition to cage-free. I'll cover those last. But before that, I want to just give you an update on general information about United Egg Producers and the U.S. egg industry. So like Sarah said, United Egg Producers is a Capper-Volstead farmer co-op. We were started in 1968, and we basically are the national trade association for the egg farmers and the egg industry. We are a farmer co-op, which means to be a member of United Egg Producers, you actually have to be an egg farmer. So you have to own the land, you have to own the barns to be able to qualify for UEP membership. And I really like that. I really like the fact that our United Egg Producers is just pure farmers. It does not include allied or other miscellaneous industry folks. We do have a sister organization that we manage called United Egg Association, and some of those other affiliate companies and industries belong to UEA, United Egg Association. But UEP is just strictly a farmer organization. As you see in the tagline on the bottom, we're a leadership by egg farmers for egg farmers. And these are primarily the topics that we cover on a daily basis, and that we're the voice of the U.S. egg industry. Government relations, certainly our top priority is, being the voice, if you will, in Washington, D.C. with U.S. Congress, being the voice in Washington, D.C. with government agencies like USDA, FDA, EPA, and so forth. And we cover topics like biosecurity, food safety, environment, and animal welfare, of course. Again, about United Egg Producers, I have a board of directors of about 34 egg farmers. It's a pretty big board. It's sometimes a little challenging to bring 34 very diverse people, very successful companies together. That board of 34 represents about 65% of our industry. So what's one of the great things about United Egg Producers and our board of directors, when our board makes a decision, the fact that it represents 65 to 70% of the industry, we can make big changes across the industry. We can plow forward very, very quick by the fact that we represent the whole industry, and our board of directors represents 65 to 70% of the entire industry. So when our board does make a decision on something, we move pretty fast, and that's really rewarding for a staff person like myself. As you see here, those are our various committees, government relations being our main one. And then we have 3 independent scientific committees or councils. And like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Hongwei Shin serves on a couple of these. He serves on the the Scientific Advisory Committee for Animal Welfare, and he also is the chair of the Environmental Scientific Panel as well. And then just a small staff of 7 people plus some consultants in Washington, D.C. A couple years ago, we came up with these 4 strategic priorities for United Egg Producers. And those 4 strategic priorities are market transparency, trying to make sure that the price of eggs, which has been talked about a lot lately, which is probably why this call is such of interest to you all, is I'm sure that all your neighbors and people you go to church with, people you work with, everybody's talking about egg prices, and everybody's sending everybody all the various memes that are out there about how egg prices are so high and how they compare to other things. Some of them are quite funny, actually. But one of the things we wanted to improve on a couple years ago and over the next 2 to 3 years is just the transparency and accuracy of how eggs are priced. Just so you all know, egg producers have nothing to do with the price of eggs. There's an independent organization called Urner Barry. Urner Barry prices eggs for seafood, for chicken, and some other commodities. And that is based on supply and demand. It's based on public trading of who's long and who's short and who's buying from who. And they then, based on how much trading is being done on a daily basis, Urner Barry then sets that price for the customer, which is, the grocery stores and the McDonald's and so forth. So the second strategic priority is just better industry collaboration and communication. Third strategic priority of ours is, of course, sustainability, which I'll talk a little bit about a little more in detail here in a bit. Making sustainability a huge priority for United Egg Producers and the egg industry. And then, of course, government affairs. We want to improve our already very good government affairs program and make it the very best one that there is. With that being said, our government relations top priorities, not only in the next 2 to 3 years, but also with the next farm bill, would be immigration and labor, truthful labeling. The truthful labeling, just so you all know, is kind of with these imitation eggs. It's a bit like all these various milk products, soy milk, almond milk. The question with regards to the milk industry, the dairy industry, and then also applies in the egg industry is, should these products be able to call themselves milk, or should they be called, soy liquid or almond liquid? And the same goes to eggs. Should these products be able to be called eggs when in fact there is no egg in it, and an animal, in our case a chicken, did not actually produce that product? That imitation product was produced in a plant of some sort of factory. So that's what truthful labeling. We just want the labeling to be truthful for the consumers, and we're going to be asking Congress to help us with that, as well as that being in the next farm bill. And then of course climate policy, animal disease indemnities for low path AI and high path AI, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then just clarification on what is a Capra-Volstead farmer co-op and making sure that still applies. As I mentioned earlier, sustainability is a very, very important priority of United Egg Producers and the egg industry and our egg farmers. This last year, UEP helped lead the industry's life cycle assessment. And very shortly, within the next few weeks, our industry's updated life cycle assessment will be released out to the industry, out to the media, out to politicians, and so forth. And I think that people will see that the egg industry's footprint, environmental footprint, has improved dramatically over the years and decades, but our environmental footprint is really great compared to other sources of protein, animal protein. And I look forward to not only that being released, but I also look forward to results from UEP's participation in the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs. We are a founding member of this roundtable. I personally am the co-chair of the Egg Working Group. And on this sustainable roundtable, we have identified, and this involves chicken, turkey, and eggs, all of our customers, NGOs, consumer groups, and so forth, even environmental groups and animal welfare groups. We've identified our pillars as people, planet, and poultry. Those would be consistent with other sustainability pillars as well for other species and products. And then you see there under people, planet, and poultry, you see the indicators. And then we're going to have like 100+ metrics. And the data collection of those indicators has just started. That software, that technology to capture and record and be able to share that kind of sustainability data for chicken, turkey, and eggs has just been sent out to all poultry farmers across the country. And that beast will begin being fed by this data, by these metrics. And hopefully within a matter of a few months, we'll start to be able to share data of how sustainable the U.S. poultry industry is, as well as the egg industry. So as you see, the United Egg Producers is the voice of the U.S. egg industry, and I'm very proud to work for United Egg Producers. And then a little bit about the U.S. egg industry itself. That was about UEP. So about U.S. egg industry, I think you'll find some of this stuff fascinating. In 1970, there were 10,000 egg companies all across the United States. Today, in 2023, there are less than 123 commercial companies. And you'll be shocked to know, and after I talk about the transition to cage-free here in a bit, you'll be shocked to know that in the next 5 to 10 years, it is predicted by banks and insurance companies and others that we'll only have 25 to 30 egg companies left in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're going to go from the mid-70s of 10,000 egg companies across the U.S. to by 2030, likely only have 25 to 30 companies left. You see the size of the farms. Our size of our egg farms have gotten big, 59 companies with more than 1 million birds. The average size egg farm is 1.5 to 2 million birds, and we have a few farms, mainly in the Midwest, that have over 6 million egg-laying hens on one farm. It's fascinating to see these farms, the technology, the innovation, the speed by which the eggs come out of the houses into a processing plant, through the machine, into a carton, and into a truck or refrigeration, and then off to the customer. It's just fascinating how quick it is. Within 24 hours from the time an egg is laid in a commercial egg farm, within 24 hours, that same egg is in a grocery store somewhere. So I'm always fascinated when I meet people and they say, well, I buy my eggs at my local farmer's market because the eggs are fresher. And I always laugh at that because I know that the average size egg company, the average size egg farm, just does not have the capacity on their farm to store and refrigerate very many days of egg production. So every day they've got to get rid of what they produced today because they got, a million more eggs coming tomorrow and a million more eggs coming the next day and the next day. So they've got to get rid of it, which is why the eggs are so fresh in grocery stores when they're buying them from commercial egg farms. It's fascinating to see where eggs are being produced compared to 1995. You'll see Iowa as alone has 3 million people, but they have 60 million egg-laying hens in the state of Iowa. It's become pretty clear the last 10 to 20 years. It's a lot more efficient to produce eggs where corn and soybean is cheap. So it's a lot more efficient to produce eggs where corn and soybean is prevalent. So Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and so forth. Ohio is an example you see here. And that gives you an idea. This is just another snapshot of the previous slide. So as I mentioned, Iowa has 3 million people in Iowa, 60 million layers. With 60 million layers in Iowa, that means they're producing about 50 million eggs a day in Iowa. So 45 million eggs every day out of Iowa, 45 million plus eggs every day out of Iowa need to go somewhere around the country to be consumed, to be bought and consumed. So when there are various state laws that pop up about how eggs should be produced, of which I'll talk about last today, then those egg producers in Iowa have a logistical nightmare when it comes to who do they sell their eggs to, how do they sell them, where do they sell them, are they meeting state laws, and are they meeting customer specs and requirements? It's a real challenge when eggs are basically being produced. The majority of the eggs that need to be in this country are produced in these blue states, and the yellow or gold states are where the eggs are being consumed. As an example, California has 45 million people, and there's only about 10 million egg-laying hens in California. So every single day, about 30 million eggs need to come into California from some other state. It is a real logistical challenge for our industry. The per capita consumption continues to go up, as you see, and that's great. The average person per year consumes about 285 to 290 eggs. And then this is basically how eggs are broken out and consumed on an annual basis. 53% is sent to a grocery store and bought and put into your refrigerator at home and consumed via a shell egg, if you will, in your house. And then about 32% of all eggs produced on an annual basis are further processed into spaghetti noodles, breads, baked goods, and things like that. And then about 10% is food service, sold to restaurants, either in a liquid form or even in a shell egg form to food service companies that ultimately sell to restaurants and things. And then just 4 to 5% of our eggs are exported out of this country, mainly to Canada and to Mexico. So now I'll switch from basically a general understanding of the industry to our top 2 challenging issues. First one is high-path avian influenza, which is why the price of eggs has gone so high the last year. And those of you that are engineers and scientists, you're probably fully aware of high-path AI. When I'm talking to audiences or even my neighbors or friends about high-path avian influenza, the analogy I use is basically like COVID. When we experienced COVID in 2020, there were so many unknowns. It crosses the country so fast, and you're left wondering, how do you take control of it? How do you get control of it? How do you stamp it out? And that's what, in our case, that's what high-path avian influenza, means, and it's why it's a huge challenge for us. The first detection of it was last year, 2022, high-path avian influenza in the U.S. poultry industry was February of 2022. I'll back up just a bit to say that our last big outbreak in poultry in the U.S. with high-path avian influenza was in 2015. And just as a reference point, in 2015, and you see the numbers from this last 12 months, but in 2015, the U.S. egg industry lost 36 million layers, 6 million pullets. And pullets are the time period by which a baby chick is laid at day old up to about 16 to 18 weeks when a pullet starts to lay eggs. So we house these baby birds, young birds, if you will, these pullets in what were called pullet farms. And those pullet farms, it's when they're not laying eggs, but about the 16 to 18 week age, they start to lay eggs. And so we take them out of the pullet houses, the pullet farms, and we put them into layer houses on the layer farms. And then they'll lay eggs on that layer farm up until about 80 weeks. If companies, egg companies decide to molt, those birds will go into a molt for a couple of weeks, and then they'll continue to lay eggs up until 115 or 120 weeks of age. So if they're possibly in, that layer house for about 100 weeks if they're molted. But as you see here in 2022 and so far in 2023, the U.S. egg industry has lost 44.3 million egg-laying hens. If you factor in broiler, turkey, and layers, we've lost a total of 58.62 million birds. So by far, the vast majority of the 58 million birds that have been lost due to high-path AI over the last 12 months has been on layer farms. But as you see, only 30 commercial egg farms have actually tested positive for high-path AI. The other 290 commercial farms have primarily been on turkey farms. The turkey industry has lost 40% of their flock over the last 12 months. The U.S. egg industry, with 44 million birds we've lost, that's about 13 to 14% of our inventory, our supply. And so anytime you lose, 13, 14% of a commodity, the price will swing a huge amount based on that, the fact that it is a commodity and you've lost 13 to 14% of that supply. Knocking on wood, the last outbreak, the last positive egg farm was December 20th. And so that's been, 3 months now since we've had a positive layer farm. The turkey farms, for some reason, continue to have some positive cases, as you see on this slide. January 2023, February 2023, March of 2023. Those commercial farms there have been the turkey farms. And then this is the actual layer detections by month over the last, actually the last 15 months, if you will, January, February, and March of this year. And then here you see again, like I said, the last commercial layer farm was December 20th. One of the things I like to show, even though we've lost 44 to 45 million birds, or 13% of our industry regarding supply, 99% of all U.S. egg farms prevented high-path AI from coming onto their farm this last 12 months. That's a real success story. Our biosecurity on our egg farms in the U.S. has increased significantly since 2015. In 2015, as much as we did not want to hear it, as much as we did not want to admit it, in 2015, we were spreading it from farm to farm to farm, county to county, state to state, through vehicles, through people. In this case, and again, in 2015, it started in April and it was over by the end of June in 2015. And it was primarily in Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. In 2022 and 23 so far, it's all over the country, 47 or 48 states. And it's a random, you'll have a positive layer case in Colorado, and then 2 weeks or a month later, you'll have a positive egg farm in Pennsylvania. And so there's no way that we're laterally spreading this current virus from farm to farm. And that's why we're so proud of the fact that 99% of our farms, through their strong biosecurity, have kept it off of their farms. And that's really, really, really good. I think this is my last slide on high-path avian influenza. On March 2nd, so just earlier this month, I met with the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, along with leadership from National Chicken Council and the National Turkey Federation in Washington, D.C., and Secretary Vilsack's office. We talked about how we can stop this thing, how we can prevent more of this happening in 2023. Our U.S. government, your taxpayer dollars, my taxpayer dollars, have spent $1 billion on trying to stamp this out across the country. We've spent $1 billion in all as a government through indemnity, through paying farmers for depopulation and disposal, and obviously expenses and cost for the APHIS, the USDA APHIS employees to go out to these farms to work with the depopulation and disposal and so forth. That was a good meeting on March 2nd with the secretary. UEP since has put together a task force, and that task force of worldwide experts on high path avian influenza. This UEP task force has come up with some really good additional strong biosecurity programs, and our government is applauding and thanking United Egg Producers for these out-of-the-box additional biosecurity measures to continue to try to keep U.S. egg farms from testing positive from high path AI. We're going to do some proactive swabbing that we'll do rather than waiting for the government to do. We're going to do some proactive swabbing, God forbid, on our next positive farm. And then vaccination. Probably many of you are wondering about, why isn't the egg industry just vaccinating? Why isn't the poultry industry vaccinating for this like we did with COVID? And that's a very complicated answer, to be honest with you. The main reason why the U.S. poultry industry is not vaccinating for high path avian influenza is because the U.S. broiler industry, the U.S. chicken industry, exports about 20% of everything they produce on a daily basis around the world. And these countries around the world that are buying U.S. chicken meat, they're looking always for opportunities to come up with an excuse not to buy U.S. chicken meat. And the World Animal Health Organization has to, if a country decides to use high path avian influenza, the World Animal Health Organization assumes that they would only use a high path avian influenza vaccination if it's endemic. And if it's endemic, then the World Animal Health Organization has an obligation to tell the world that so-and-so country is now using a vaccination. Therefore, all these countries that want to use an excuse not to buy U.S. chicken meat would see, hey, the U.S. egg industry is using a vaccination. Therefore, we do not want to buy U.S. chicken meat. And therefore, the U.S. broiler industry, the U.S. chicken industry would lose a significant amount of money. I'm talking it's in the $2 to $3 billion is what their export market means to them. And so basically, the U.S. chicken industry has basically blocked significant vaccination talks with our government, even in our own industry. But I would say that if high path avian influenza continues in 2023, our government, our White House, our Congress, our taxpayers are going to get to the point where they're going to say, hey, you need to start thinking about and using vaccination. And they will tell the U.S. chicken industry that the egg industry will be allowed to vaccinate. I think that will happen if this continues on this year. I'm going to totally switch categories and go to cage-free. And this will be my last topic before I open it up for questions. So the animal rights groups about 4 or 5 years ago started trying to convince all of your customers, the McDonald's, the Walmarts, the Kroger's, every restaurant, every grocery store that you can possibly think of, every food service company, everybody that buys eggs, the animal rights organizations started convincing everybody to transition to cage-free only. So get out of conventional egg production and only go to cage-free, organic, or free range. And so that transition to cage-free, because it's so complicated, it's so expensive, it's so unruly and unorganized, and quite honestly, the customer and the consumer just doesn't want to do it. It's going to disrupt our industry in a massive way over the next 4, 5, 6 years. I've used this visual a number of times to try to articulate how massive this movement to cage-free across the country is, and how it is going to decimate our industry as well. So the tsunami is going to come onto the beach, and egg farmers have 3 choices. Either get swallowed up by the tsunami right there on the beach and just stay there and get paralyzed and watch the tsunami overtake them. The tsunami in this case is going to cage-free or not. A second option is to go to high ground as quickly as you can and wait it out. And then once the tsunami has receded back out into the ocean, then you've transitioned yourself to cage-free, and you go back to the beach and you're back in business and you keep selling eggs to your customers just like you would, but in this case, you'll be cage-free only. Or the third option is you go to as high a ground as possible and you just sell your company or walk away from your company and you're no longer in the business. And that's where the majority of our industry is going to head. So what is cage-free? Cage-free is, thankfully, vertically integrated, multi-tiered aviaries and indoor. You do not have to put your birds outside to be considered cage-free. UVP has launched this new cage-free website as well as this new cage-free logo. These are just, this is just a summary of all the food service, restaurant, retailers, grocery stores, and so forth that are requiring cage-free only being sold in their grocery stores or sold in their restaurants by 2024 or 2025. You see, it equates to 225 million hens needed by 2024, 2025, just to meet these customer specs, these customer requirements. But the Humane Society of the United States and the other animal rights organizations suspected that some of these customers will back out of their cage-free commitments. And so the Humane Society and others said, well, let's go try to figure out how to force consumers to go cage-free only another way. And they're doing that through state laws. And so out of the 50 states, there's about 24 or 25 states that allow any general consumer or activist groups to go through a ballot initiative process to pass whatever they want in that state in the next election. And so the Humane Society has very cleverly decided to go a state route and try to pass state laws that say all eggs sold in and all eggs produced in these states have to be cage-free by a certain date. And you see here, they've been very successful. So far, you've got California, Massachusetts, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, Utah, and Rhode Island that HSUS has passed state laws, either through ballot initiative or legislation. You see on the right-hand side the dates by which those state laws have to be every egg produced in and sold in has to be cage-free. HSUS is currently working in Hawaii, clarifying Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, clarifying Michigan, Connecticut, and Maryland, in addition to the states you see on your screen, to also be cage-free. Basically, the per capita consumption requires 1 egg-laying hen per person. So if you just add up the population in the states on this slide, as well as the states I've mentioned that they're working in this year, you're approaching 100 million people, which means 100 million egg-laying hens need to be cage-free to meet state laws by 2024, 2025. That's just 2 years from now. And so, you know, egg farmers, like all of you, are law-abiding citizens. Egg farmers do not want to break the law. And so if these state laws hold up and if they are not changed or the compliance dates aren't pushed back, then there'll at least need to be 100 million birds in egg-laying facilities by 2024 or 2025, which is impossible to happen. That's $11+ billion that egg farmers need to spend to transition their farms to cage-free. That's just 2 to 3 years to do it, and that's financially and logistically impossible to happen. Why is it financially and logistically impossible to happen? Because the average cost to transition from conventional cage to cage-free is about $50 to $70 per bird. I mentioned earlier to you that the average size egg farm is 1.5 million to 2 million birds. So if you're a 1.5 to 2 million bird family operation, if you want to be in this industry in 3, 4, 5 years, you have to spend $70 to $100 million to stay in the industry. Most egg farmers just don't have that kind of capital. They don't have the next generation coming up to take over and take on that kind of debt. The banks, the financial and lending institutions, are saying to their customer, in this case the egg farmer, that your customer or the state by which you produce in or sell your eggs in, your customer has deemed your current assets worth zero. You currently have a bunch of cages, you currently have conventional housing, and because of these state laws and customer requirements, your current assets aren't worth anything. So therefore, you can't borrow against your current assets. You've got to come up with 60 or 70% of that $100 million on your own. Those farmers don't have that kind of money. So they will just simply close their doors, lock their barns, walk away, because they probably can't sell their farm to their competitor, because their competitor is just going to have to tear down that conventional caged housing anyway and build new cage-free. And so why would they buy one of their competitors just to have to tear their farm apart and build a whole new one? They would just build a whole new one on their own and then just go and take their customer away from them at a certain date, if that makes sense. And then customer extensions would be a disaster, of which I'll talk about quite shortly here. So to add even more challenges and complications to this cage-free situation, as you all probably know, the pork industry, the U.S. pig industry, has been under attack as well by the animal rights groups. HSUS has been passing laws across the country saying everything needs to be gestation crate free. So the U.S. pork industry has sued a number of times trying to get that clarified and make these state laws illegal. The Supreme Court heard that argument from the pork industry in October of last year, and any day now, literally any day now, we expect the pork industry and the rest of us expect the U.S. Supreme Court to make a ruling on whether California should have the right to make an Iowa pig farmer comply with California farming specs. So that will have an implication also. The Supreme Court decision will have an implication on whether the California law for the egg industry applies to an Iowa egg farmer, as well as all these other state egg laws as well. So we're waiting on pins and needles for the Supreme Court to make a decision on that, and then whether that applies or does not apply to egg production in these other states as well. So I fairly quickly have gone through these cage-free challenges, the cost, the time, the lack of customer commitments to this, the Supreme Court. And so we decided that it was probably best for UEP to work with Food Marketing Institute. So Food Marketing Institute is the national association for all the grocery stores across the country. The Albertsons, the Safeways, the Krogers, the Walmarts, they all belong to FMI as their voice as a national association. So United Egg Producers worked with FMI to do a study on the challenges associated with transitioning to cage-free. We worked with Michigan State, Purdue, and Kansas State, and that study, that cage-free study, just got done about a month ago, and we have sent the results of that study. The study itself, the report from these three universities, is about 90 pages long. Of course, we have an executive summary, but it basically summarizes and reports exactly what I've just gone over in the previous 10 slides about the cost, the time, the state laws, the Supreme Court, and so forth. Our goal with this study is to say in 2025, 2026, when the industry has not been able to transition to cage-free, when the industry is not meeting state laws across the country, we want to hold up this report, the study that these three universities did, and said, don't blame the U.S. egg industry, don't blame the U.S. egg farmers. We told you in 2022, we told you in 2023, this was going to happen, and it is now happening, so don't blame us. That's the purpose of that report and that study. I'm thankful that FMI has shared that report, the study, with all of its members as well. And so at least now we're all on the same page, knowing that the disaster is coming. Coincidentally, maybe Kroger and Walmart, the two largest food retailers in the world, have both backed away from their 2025 cage-free commitments. And now both of these large food companies are saying that best case scenario, they will be 100% cage-free by 2030 or after. So some of these retailers are starting to now push their compliance dates back even further. So U.S. egg farmers are left with scratching their head, wondering what to do. Should I stay in cages because Kroger and Walmart have now pushed their compliance date back? So does that give me now 3 or 4 extra years to continue producing eggs in cages? Or do I go cage-free? Or do I just try to sell my company or walk away from my farm? I also love this visual image right now, especially in spring when there's so many volatile storms across the country going on, including down here in Atlanta area over the weekend. Egg farmers are sitting on this country highway in their car, and they're staring at this massive storm coming their way. And again, they have 3 choices. They can plow forward, they can press the gas as far down as possible and fly through this storm and get out on the other side, hopefully, i.e. cage free. If they survive going through the storm, transitioning from cage to cage free, then they'll still be in business and it'll be a beautiful day. It'll be sunny skies on the other side of this storm. Or they can sit there and let the storm just overtake them, or they can turn their car around and fly back as fast as possible the other direction. Those are the three choices that every U.S. egg family company has over the next 5 to 10 years. I want to thank you all. I'm happy to answer as many questions that you might have, and I look forward to the conversation that we'll have here next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. That was very informative. I'll go ahead and read the questions from the chat, starting from the top. The first is, what about organic eggs and free-range eggs? And I believe this came through when you were discussing the high-path flu. So has that outbreak affected organic and free-range eggs in a similar way?
It has actually, yes. The percentages are basically the same with regards to the positive cases, if you will, but the numbers just are smaller because those farms are a lot smaller. You know, the average size organic farm might be 30 or 40,000 birds, whereas the average size commercial farm is 1.5 to 2 million. But yes, they've been hit as well, unfortunately. And you know what's interesting also is of the 100 to 130 egg companies that are left across the U.S., many of those 100 to 130 companies will produce conventional eggs, cage-free eggs, organic eggs, free-range eggs, omega-3 eggs, and so forth, Eggland's Best, if you will. So when Kroger says, I want one egg supplier in an entire southeastern part of the country, that one egg supplier has to choose, do I just sell that Kroger conventional eggs, or do I get in the production business as well of cage-free, organic, and free-range and sell Kroger all of their needs from my own company? And so that's what's happened over the years. A lot of the egg production companies are also in other forms of production types.
Next, how many employees work in a 1.5 million hen farm? And what are the demographics of those employees typically?
Yeah, there's not many. You know, you're probably on a 1.5 to 2 million bird egg farm. You're probably looking at 30 to 50 employees. That's it. You would have people that are production focused, so they would work in the houses, out where the birds and the hens are. The majority of those 30 or so employees, 30 to 50 employees, would be in the processing plant, which is also on the farm. They'd be packing eggs, they'd be grading eggs, they'd be, taking eggs into the cooler and warehouse. And then there would obviously be some administrative folks in the office. Probably to nobody's surprise on this call, the demographics of most of those employees, I would say anywhere from 60 to 80% would be Hispanic workers.
Next up, how do you keep feed trucks clean between farms?
Well, again, one of the benefits of our large egg farm is a lot of our farms have their own feed mills. So it's one of the huge differences between our industry and the turkey industry or the broiler industry, the chicken industry, is because, a Tyson's, a Purdue, they would have thousands and thousands and thousands of small contract growers. And so you're right, a feed truck from a large feed mill would be getting feed into a large feed truck and then going to multiple farms on any given day. In our case, that doesn't necessarily happen because the feed mill is on the farm. So it's all integrated. It's all done through augers from the feed mill directly out to each of the chicken houses, the layer houses on the farm. But in the event that there are feed trucks delivering feed onto commercial egg farms, the biosecurity is tremendous. There are massive size truck washers that the trucks have to go through that will wash the entire vehicle, wash the wheels, wash the undercarriage, and so forth with a chemical that would possibly kill anything going on to their farms. And then there's the Danish entry, which we call that there's inside the fence or inside a perimeter versus outside the fence or outside the perimeter. And there's all kinds of shower in, shower out type of scenarios where you have to change, disinfect before you can get anywhere near where the birds are at. Our ventilation system, since you guys are, agricultural engineers, our ventilation system is obviously much different than the chicken industry or the turkey industry. Our houses, I should have actually showed you some pictures of some commercial layer houses and farms in this presentation. Quite honestly, I'm sorry I didn't. The houses are super biosecure. They have great tunnel ventilation, and there's very few inlets or outlets. It's done through fans, whereas the turkey industry and the chicken industry would have a lot of their farming and housing is down in the southern part of the country, and they're open sided. So they're curtains that they raise and lower these curtains, and so the whole entire wall or both sides of the walls are wide open. And so a lot of things can blow in and out of there. Birds can fly in and out of there, unfortunately. So their biosecurity is more challenging with the design of their houses and farms versus the design of our houses.
With pen gestation for sows, it's difficult to control body condition in early gestation. Is it similarly hard for body condition in cage-free as well?
Well, that's a great and interesting question because, nobody in California, as an example, is eating bacon or pork chops from a gestation sow, right? The equivalent in the egg industry is our breeder companies. Our breeder companies in the egg industry are genetically breeding grandparent and parent stock. They're producing an egg. The egg goes into an incubator. And then after 21 days, the little baby chick cracks out of the egg. And then that little baby chick ends up on a layer farm, a pullet farm, and then a layer farm. So, and then we're obviously consuming the egg, but that egg came from a hen actually in a cage-free house, a cage-free environment. So it's 100% of our industry would need to transition from cage to cage-free, 100%. Whereas the pork industry, the pig industry, the swine industry would just have to transition. I've heard like 10% of their industry, because the other 90% is how pigs are being grown out. They're not on gestation farms per se. So it's significantly different, the two industries. I hope I explained that well.
Next, what is the cost of product in cages versus cage-free?
That's a great question. 3 or 4 years ago, the cost of production in a conventional cage versus cage-free is about 33% more to produce on a daily basis, because the feed conversion is a lot worse in cage-free. The number of employees per birds is higher. So about 33% more daily cost to produce cage-free versus cage. But you got to add in the cost to transition as well, that $50 to $70 per bird. That has also got to factor into that dozen per egg cost to go cage-free. I said 3 to 4 years ago, 2 to 3, 4 years ago, because like every commodity, like every farmer, like every industry, the longer you do it, the longer the cage-free equipment companies, the genetic companies, the farmers themselves, they're getting better and better and better. And so the mortality is coming down in cage-free versus what it is in cage. The conversion of feed, of soybean and corn into energy, into production is getting better and more comparable to cage. So I suspect in the next 5 to 10 years, the cost to produce a dozen cage-free eggs will be quite similar to the cost to produce a dozen caged eggs, now or 5 years ago. The real challenge or entry to go cage-free is that $50 to $70 per bird. It's just an enormous expense.
I've got a question here. I'm not quite sure what it means, but maybe you will. How do you get the birds at the end of their production life? George, I don't know if you want to unmute and clarify.
Well, I think I can answer it, and hopefully it'll be the right answer. If the family business, if the family egg farmer does not molt At about 80 weeks, 85 to 90 weeks, that bird is now called or described as a spent hen. And she's pretty fragile and isn't laying. The majority of her eggs are not large eggs. And so, and this would be the same case if the company does molt and then at 115 or 128 weeks, those hens, those spent hens, the majority of those now would go to rendering and would be rendered in to ultimately become pet food, basically. Still a small percentage of our hens go to fowl processing plants and would end up in some sort of food product for humans. But it's not as efficient, not as easy for fowl processing plants to get meat off of a 3 or 4 pound egg laying hen compared to a bigger broiler chicken. So a lot of fowl processing plants around the country don't want egg laying spent hens because of the inefficiencies. Hopefully that answered your question.
Has the push for cage-free accelerated consolidation into larger farms, or would that
Very
have
much
happened
so.
anyway?
Yeah, very much so. You can imagine that 50, 70, $100 million, only the big companies, unfortunately, are going to be the ones that can afford to do that. That's why we're going to go from 100 egg companies in the US to 25 or 30, and those 25 to 30 are going to be enormous companies. It's super sad. It's sad that 70% of our family operations will go out of business, and those will be the ones that are that 1, 2, 3 million bird size farm or company. So yes, the big companies are going to be the ones left. And what will happen in 5 or 10 years from now, everybody's going to say, oh, the egg industry is just factory farmers or just big companies. Well, you know, be careful what you ask for, right? And how you vote. Be careful what you ask for. And you know what's sad about all this too is the Krogers, the Walmarts, the McDonald's won't be blamed for this. The egg farmers will be blamed for this, which is another reason why we are going to have that study that Kansas State, Michigan State, and Purdue did to wave our hand and wave up and say, again, don't blame us for only having 25 to 30 large companies. We had 100 small companies, smaller size companies, and now we only have 30. Don't blame us. We warned you about this in 2022, 2023.
What are the opportunities for system engineers, like many of those on this call, going forward?
It's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind, two things come to mind, is how can we engineer the ventilation and the design of the house to continue to have ventilation that keeps the birds alive and keeps the temperatures at the optimal temperature inside the house, but also prevent any kind of wild birds, wild sparrows and things from entering into that farm and giving our farms high path avian influenza. So that'd be number one. The second thing would be just to continue to innovate on making sure our cage-free and other housing is as efficient as possible, so that we can keep the cost of this high quality protein as low as possible. We're going to be getting more and more consumers wanting outdoor access, free range, and so forth. And so the engineering behind how do we make those as efficient as possible, but also environmentally friendly, welfare friendly, and food safety friendly. Those would be the areas where I would hope that the engineering would be very useful, and research around those is possible as well.
Is there any research that indicates what nutritional differences, if any, exist between cage-free and conventional produced eggs for the consumer?
There's zero nutritional difference. Zero.
So is there a technical justification for promoting cage-free over conventional?
It's honestly just the activist groups, the animal rights groups, the Humane Society of the United States, PETA, Mercy for Animals. It's just those organizations ultimately not wanting people to eat eggs. And so they know that if they think that if customers and consumers are go to cage-free, that the cost will go up, and then therefore you'll eat less of them because the cost goes up. And then they'll continue to push out of cage-free and go, no, we meant cage-free was outdoor access. We meant, so forth. They'll keep moving the goalpost, unfortunately, to where the cost will continue to go up and people will keep eating less and less and less.
What's the best way to keep avian flu from infecting a backyard flock?
Ooh, prayer. That's honestly it. Because the backyard flock, ultimately, one of the great things about a commercial egg farm today is the birds are inside. They're enclosed in a building 24/7 for the 80 weeks. The temperature inside the house is 72 degrees 100% of the time. They have a constant feed source all the time of great nutrition, vitamins, corn, soybean. 100% of the time they have all of that access. When you go to backyard flocks, those birds are literally walking around a backyard. They're pecking up worms. They're pecking up their own poop, their friends' poop. They're pecking up migratory fowl flying over the top that just were either in Canada or Brazil. And whatever they picked up when they were in Canada, Brazil, or China, they're pecking up whatever they've dropped down onto the ground. Those backyard flocks are fearful, quite honestly, fearful of foxes and coyotes. Obviously, they're defecating on the ground, and when it rains, that could run into a local creek or stream or river. I like the fact that consumers can walk into any grocery store in the country, stand in front of the egg case, and they can buy whatever they want with regards to what fits their social needs best and their financial needs best. People from time to time have said, well, you should do a survey, a customer survey, a consumer survey of what consumers actually want. The reality of it is every single day across the world, consumers are doing a survey. It's the most honest survey you could possibly do. And that is they stand in front of the egg case and they buy what they want. They vote with their pocketbook every single day. And 90% of all the US consumers still want that conventional egg. Unfortunately, the animal rights groups are forcing people to go to cage-free, of which they do not want to take that choice taken away, and they do not want to pay more. Which is why Kroger and Walmart have backed away from their commitments and going to now 2030 or 2030 and beyond.
What is the loss in percentage of eggs due to breakage in a cage-free system?
It's higher. I don't know the exact percentages. It is higher in cage-free versus conventional. It's probably, less than 5%, but I'm not sure. There was a study done that Dr. Hong Wei Shin was involved in a few years ago. The study was the Coalition for Sustainable Egg Supply. You could literally Google or type in the Coalition for Sustainable Egg Supply. Exactly that question was answered in this study. And so you could see those results. But like I mentioned earlier, our industry, our engineers, our genetic companies, our equipment companies will get better and better and better with this cage-free equipment. And so that breakage will get less and less, and it will eventually be comparable to what cages are or cages were at a certain point.
Well, I've reached the end of the questions in the chat. Would anyone like to unmute and ask any further questions? Okay. Well, I will. Oh, there's one more that just popped up. What can we do as citizens to stem the cage-free movement across the country?
I appreciate you asking. But honestly, it's like so many other things that are happening in our country. It is a super minority of the people that are threatening all kinds of things to cause massive changes. And unfortunately, in the US egg industry, that ship has sailed. There's probably, of the $15 billion that's going to cost my membership to transition from cage to cage free, of the $15 billion, there's probably already been 4 to 5 billion already spent and built in cage free. And those companies are those large companies, those large members of mine that are sitting around my board table. They're the ones that have spent that $5 billion to already go cage free. And so they no longer are going to want United Egg Producers, the voice of the egg industry, their member organization. They're no longer going to want me trying to convince anybody not to go cage free anymore, because they've spent $5 billion on something that they want to be able to get a return on their investment. And so that ship has sailed. Unfortunately, there's probably nothing I would ask you to do. There's probably nothing you can do. It's now up to the animal rights groups. It's now up to state legislators. It's now up to voters. It's now up to consumers to decide whether they're going to actually go in and do it or not, whether they're going to pass these laws or not, whether they're going to go into a grocery store and buy it or not, or whether they're going to refuse to buy eggs in that grocery store and go across the street and buy their eggs somewhere else where there still are consumer choices. But I appreciate the question. We all should have rallied ourselves 10 years ago. But again, there's so many things that are happening to our country right now that we're going to look back 10, 20 years from now and wish that we would have all rallied and stood up and voted against. But that's the evolution of countries like ours.
Can you speak about dealing with poultry litter or manure in the industry?
Yeah, I'm proud of the fact that the majority of our manure now is composted on farms, and in a lot of cases is sold as commercial fertilizer. Those that is not composted on commercial egg farms is land applied on commercial farms, mainly in the Midwest, of course, corn and soybean farms throughout the spring and summer. So our manure has become a real value, a real valuable product that commercial egg farmers have. Commercial layer manure has tremendous nutrient value, and so not only do corn, soybean farms want to have it spread on their farms, but even golf courses. If it is composted and pelletized, it's spread on wonderful, beautiful golf courses. Even the Chicago Cubs, as an example, Wrigley Field is fertilized by a commercial layer farm outside of the Chicago area. That's the kind of tremendous value and nutrient content that commercial layer farms have. And it's so dry. That's part of the value, is why it's so dry and easily transferred from one site to another site.
Great. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of the questions, so I'll go ahead and call it there. If you'd all please join me in thanking Chad for a very interesting and informative presentation. We're looking forward to a number of upcoming member hours. The next is April 4th, and we'll be joined by Roger Hoy, director of the Nebraska Tractor Test Lab. And during the week following, April 11th, Keith Tinsey will present on potato production and supply chain management. Details are available at asabe.org/events. Thank you so much,
Thanks, everybody.
Chad.
Thank you.